and welcome again to VLGA Connect, in conversation today with the CEO of Infrastructure Australia, Romilly Madew. And with me for the conversation is Kathryn Arndt, CEO of the VLGA. Firstly, Kathryn, hello.
Hi, Chris. How are you today? And welcome, Romilly.
Thank you.
And Romilly, welcome to the program. Good to meet you. And we're all in lockdown, so we're all coming from common ground at the moment. But good to talk to you about the plan that you've recently released today.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Kathryn, I'm mindful that we've spent a bit of time on the show in the past with Infrastructure Victoria. We haven't really spent a lot of time looking at the national picture and how Victorian priorities, I guess, fit into that. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation today.
Indeed, Chris, that's right. And really to learn more from Romilly on the 15-year strategy that Infrastructure Australia recently released and how that might connect into Infrastructure Victoria's strategy, and in particular, what's the impact for local government, and also the opportunities for local government as you see them to be.
Thanks for that. So why don't I put it into perspective where we sit within the iBodies. So there's iBodies right now around Australia. We're the federal government iBody, and we were the first. So in 2008, we were established. And we sit within the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications, and local government sits within our department. And our role is we're the independent advisor to the federal government, but our key stakeholders are local government and the states and territories. And that's who we mostly work with. And why is that? Well, we're advising the federal government on the reforms and investments that we think that should be considered for the whole of Australia. And I'll touch on that in a minute. So how do we connect with the infrastructure bodies? Well, we have a really close knit group called the iBodies Network. And that includes all the CEOs of the iBodies, and Infrastructure Australia chairs that. And in some cases, we do joined up work. So with Infrastructure New South Wales, we just released Pathway to Infrastructure Resilience. It's two research papers on resilience, which I know all your members would find really interesting and helpful. And that was a joint piece of work we did with Infrastructure New South Wales. But what's really important is, because of COVID and some of these trends that have started being considered to stick. So two trends, for instance, one would be working from home and the other one would be online shopping. And so what's happened in the last 18 months is all the iBodies have looked at their state infrastructure strategies. In some cases, they've brought them forward, or they have released updated infrastructure strategies known as the SIS. And as you'd be aware, Infrastructure Victoria has released a draft infrastructure strategy. So how we and our strategy links with that, our latest plan, is they're very, they interlink with each other. The themes are very similar. You'll see very, very similar themes. So what's important is that there needs to be alignment between the state infrastructure strategies and the federal infrastructure strategies. The reason the alignment is so important is a lot of the funding that the federal government allocates is to the states, and they're really looking for that alignment in policy and investment from the states and territories. So we work closely hand in hand with the states across a whole lot of areas. I want to touch on what the plan is. The reason being is, if you look online, you'd probably get a bit of a shiver. There's over 1,000 pages currently with the document. So I just want to kind of paint a picture what the plan is to make it easier for you as local governments to where to look. But it really is a plan for everyone. And the reason being is the reforms aren't ours alone. The reforms are a collective. And the only way that the reforms will come alive and we'll see some action on them is if we all work on them together. So let me put it into, let me paint a picture and give you a story about the plan. Infrastructure Australia looks at business cases which are seeking over 250 million in grants. We have the infrastructure priority list, which is an unfunded list. And then the other work we do, which is really important, is policy and research. And we do an audit, and then we also do a plan. So we released an audit in 2019 and then identified 180 challenges and opportunities. What is so unique about that year is we pivoted. we stopped taking a jurisdictional lens and we took a geographical lens, which local governments will appreciate. So we look at fast-growing cities, so Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, smaller cities and regional centres, so Ballarat would be a regional centre, and Geelong would be a regional centre, small towns, rural communities, and regional areas, remote and Northern Australia. So we took this geographical lens. So when we looked at these 180 challenges and opportunities in the audit, we also took a user-centric lens, so access, quality and cost. So every single challenge and opportunity would have a geographical, was it national or where its impact was? And then we do this user-centred approach. And the reason I stress that is that has followed through when we look at the plan. So the audit really articulated, these are the 180 challenges and opportunities. And then we had COVID. So last year, in the end of last year, we released the impacts of COVID on infrastructure report, and that also fed into the plan. We then look at economic, and for the first time this year, we're also looking at social. So economic was energy, transport, water, telecommunications, and then as I said, social is new, as is waste, which is important, especially if you look at the leading research that has been done by Infrastructure Victoria, and I'm sure you've covered off on that. Also, which will be of interest, is that we have 3 cross-sector chapters. Place, which I think is crucially important because we're now really taking this place-based lens, and that really fits into that geographic view that we have, sustainability and resilience, and infrastructure industry. So they're our key cross-cutting themes. And I just want to then, I won't touch on the key themes yet. You can see all that. And, anything I say about key themes, we're all going to know. But I just want to explain how you read the plan. So there's 29 recommendations, but there's basically over 1,000 activities. And the reason being is we then we identify action, but then we look at agents of change, activities, reforms, time periods underneath that. So you need to go into the implementation pathway, and you can literally go into the implementation pathway and look under local government, and it'll identify those activities that we have identified where the local government is the change agent. And we've also tried to be incredibly pragmatic and practical, but we also want this to be actionable. So every year we will draw out and do a report on those 29 reforms, but we're not going to reinvent the wheel. So if you think about sustainability and resilience, we will use the UN Sustainable Development Goals in some cases as the measure. And so we will track how we, all of us, so federal government, state governments and local governments and industry, how we are implementing these reforms. And we will use, and all the way through the plan, you will see these measures, target measures that we are saying, that is what we will use to measure how we're going. So what's the role of local government? Well, local government have a crucial role. I always say local government are the closest of all governments to community, and they really do. I actually am involved heavily in our local government here on the Northern Beaches, and I chair the Currawong State Park Committee for our local government. And the reason being is, so you know how I talked about that geographic lens? Well, what we're saying is Australia has all these unique geographies. Well, you are the unique geography. So if you think about local government in Victoria, you of anyone understand the unique strengths, opportunities and challenges of your area. So you have a really unique role to play. Secondly, you provide many of the essential services. So, and you all know this, I'm not repeating anything you don't know, but you also have a unique understanding of the community's challenges and opportunities, which I mentioned. So therefore, it's vital that the local government is meaningfully engaged in infrastructure planning and decision-making, whether that's at a state level or at even a federal level. So on our infrastructure priority list, we had some great examples of where local governments, groups of local governments have put in proposals to be considered, and we have it on there.
If you could just expand a little bit on, you know, how, when local government looks at this plan, how do they see that it reflects, I guess, the priorities that have come from the ground in those various places around the country?
Local government, in many cases, are the active owners of transport, water, digital and social infrastructure. And they are chapters that we have. So we have it in the plan, and we specifically talk about certain reforms in there. And that means then that there are certain elements, which I'll go through in a minute, that specifically relate to, we're calling out opportunities for reform in that area from local government being the change agent. We also, though, talk about the opportunity for collaboration across local governments. And you're seeing those types of collaborations naturally happen around Australia. But we're drawing out, we all know this, you know, everyone is under stress and strain when it comes to resourcing and resources. And so we're calling out the great opportunities that these collaborations between local governments are to support the reform. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The reforms range from improving community access to high quality social infrastructure. I just want to ponder on that for a quick second. Social infrastructure has really come to the forefront because of COVID. Access to green and blue infrastructure, access to libraries. You know, there's been this access to parks, access to healthcare, and so the importance of social infrastructure now is never been greater than at this time, and you can really see that coming out in the trends. And the other reform is recognising that local governments are at the front line when it comes to climate uncertainty. And so when you go into in the sustainability and resilience section, for instance, we talk about the importance of don't reinvent the wheel. It's these communities that have felt the impacts of climate change and are best placed to provide advice and respond to actions of climate change. So I'll leave it there because I've covered a lot of ground, but I'm sure you've got lots more questions.
Romilly, if I could explore the place-based outcomes for communities, and you've talked a little bit about that, and of course we all know because of COVID, we are all living in our local communities more than we ever have potentially, and working in them also. Where do you see, I guess, and when you refer to place, do you look at it as individual local government areas, or I guess picking up your point about perhaps, you know, the geographical and regional look of place?
So you are right. We take more of it may depend on the type of infrastructure you're talking about, but we do look at it as in a geographical sense. And that's why we keep talking about that collaboration between councils. So if you think about, and you know, there might be 3 local governments that are in one area that's unique. I don't know. I mean, it might be coastal, for instance. So on a specific reform, those 3 councils may collaborate together. Then you may have 3 other local councils that are located together regionally or remotely, and there may be another reform, a social infrastructure reform, for instance, that there is a opportunity for them to work together. And so, if I explain it this way, we say this in the plan. We talk about shared vision for a region. So you can define that, you need to define the region. But we talk about the importance of developing it collaboratively and locally based on a holistic picture of the interrelated elements of that area, which is the example I just gave you. So, and all the local government areas, they know what those interrelated issues are, you know. It could be a whole lot of different things. And then we look at and saying the vision, they should be developing a combined vision should seek to address the area's needs, build on its strengths, take advantage of its opportunities. And then by developing a shared vision, the capacity to deliver infrastructure that improves productivity and quality of life while meeting community needs is enhanced.
Yeah, and I was really struck by the language in the report in the executive summary that talks about reducing place-based disadvantage. And it reminded me, Chris, and it probably will for you too, we ran a global executive panel recently on community wealth building, and there was a lot of similarities in the discussion, and that was, I guess a concept that the Europe have picked up, but also Sydney City Council have also adopted a community wealth building strategy, and it really does look at some of these things that you're talking about in your report. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Or...
I'm not, but I'll give you, I mean, we lived on the land for 14 years between Sydney and Canberra. It was just at Lake George. So a lot of the regional and rural issues we have felt and understood. And I look back to when we were there over 12 years ago, and telecommunications, digital access was appalling. We relied on satellite, and it was just, in those days, we really struggled. What has come out in COVID is the importance of access to data and digital and telecommunications. But what also came out, which we call out in the plan, is this digital divide. And where we found that the students, that we were all forced, where people were forced to go to work from home and to be in lockdown, that the students where there were high levels of internet, fast internet, there wasn't a problem. But that's not the case in regional and rural Australia. And the other example is the access to telehealth. Well, wasn't it great for me? I now live in a city. I was one of the millions of people who were able to use telehealth. But you need to have access to the internet to be able to use telehealth. And so then what we found, so an example of collaboration is, we were finding these pockets in regional and remote and rural Australia where they were saying to their communities, come into these areas where we've created a hub for you, and you can do your telehealth. So you may be half an hour from that hub, but you come into the hub and we'll give you access to the internet, and you can do your telehealth locally. And they're the types of innovation we want to see, because telehealth is a great opportunity for regional Australia, because it means they're not having to travel, to pay for that travel, to have to go into, to their local, in Victoria's case, they might have to go into a regional centre or into Melbourne. That means they could actually spend more time with their family. It wouldn't be as expensive, and they could use those local hubs. And that's what we're talking, that's just one example. There's many out there, but that's an example of a hub that helps our communities in socially, and has so many benefits.
Romilly, you make the point that the challenge of progressing these reforms that you outline in the plan is a shared challenge with the different levels of government and other authorities. What do you see happening next in terms of giving life to that? What's your expectation from, for example, the Commonwealth, from the state governments, etc., now that the plan's out there?
The Commonwealth Government is, under our Act, is required to respond. So within a year, the Commonwealth Government will respond to the 29 recommendations. And as I said, there are a lot underneath that. But the Commonwealth is required to respond. Where we see the state's involvement is that work has already started through the state infrastructure strategies that I've talked about. But that's only infrastructure, and in some specific areas. We're already finding that we're having conversations with the transport areas of state government. Today, for instance, we had an update from New South Wales Schools Infrastructure. And so we're going down to those unique areas within economic and social infrastructure, and really trying to bring the reforms are alive, and saying, whatever planning you have coming into the next 5, 10, 15 years, because the reforms are very much time framed. So all our sustainability and resilience reform, we're calling for that. We want to see that the next 0 to 5 years, for instance, which won't surprise anybody. And so we're really saying to them, we want you to embed that in your strategy, in your policies, in your initiatives. So we want to see the states do it that way. Where local government comes into play is picking it up. So if you're doing a master plan, if you're looking at a whole of Victoria Local Government Association, you may be looking at your strategy, and you may say the 5 top areas are technology, sustainability and resilience, collaboration, and the impacts of COVID, or water or energy or whatever. We hope that you call on the plan and link what you're trying to do with our reforms, and that you're using the same measures that we are using in the plan. Because one of the things that, again, has come out of COVID, and again we call on in the plan, is the use of data in COVID has been amazing. If we think about QR codes and collating that data, and if we think about now, see how we're tracking how many people are vaccinated. But what's really disappointing is it's actually the private sector who have access to better data than the public sector. And the public sector data is slow to respond. So we knew people were moving to the regions. I mean, the regions could tell we were moving to the regions, but it was more from Google, Uber Eats. So it was more from the private sector saying they've moved. And Medicare was also telling us that they've moved, but the Medicare data is like 6 to 12 months behind. But the reason why it's really important that we know that those numbers that move to the regions and where they move to the regions is we need to make sure that those regions are high on any list to make sure that they're getting the services that they require, because they've got an uptick in could be permanent population. So we call out in the plan the importance of data and a coordinated response to how we track data.
Romilly, what strikes me is that this is probably this conversation that we're having, and even the work that Infrastructure Australia does with the state-based infrastructure bodies would be worthy of almost a live panel conversation, I think, where I think you referred to them as I-bodies.
I-bodies, yeah.
That's right. And picking up some of the things that you're referring to in this report, but also you mentioned the work that the I-bodies have done on resilience and how relevant that would be for the local government sector also. So perhaps, and I won't ask you to commit to that now, but
that's our job. We would welcome the opportunity. Our role is to communicate what the reforms and opportunities look like. So we welcome the opportunity. We do it regularly.
Oh, well, we might work on that then.
Can I move the time frame forward a little bit, Romilly? I'm thinking of an example. Just last week, one of our major regional centres, Greater Shepparton, in partnership with some local groups, has put out some media saying how they're looking to get the Shepparton bypass stage 1, stage 2, I forget now, recognised on your national priority list, which is coming out next February. Can you explain to us where that sits in relation to this plan and your ongoing processes?
Absolutely. So the priority list is really important, and it's for local, state and federal government. And the reason being is this, there's 100, it moves, it's a live list, so it moves regularly. So there's over 160 proposals on the priority list, both economic and social. And as I said, to remind you, we also put that geographic lens on those. And the reason it's unfunded list, the reason it's important, so if you go think about this year's budget, 31 proposals on our priority list were funded partly or fully funded. So the federal government uses our priority list, not just our department, the federal government uses our priority list, and they go, when we're thinking about grants, when we're thinking about proposals, when we're looking to fund projects, let's look at the Infrastructure Australia's priority list first to see what they've got on there. And the reason they're doing that is because the priority list is stage 1, 2 or 3 of a proposal. So a group of local governments could have put a proposal together, so thinking about Shepparton, and it may just be stage 1. It could be just a couple of pages, and it's identifying the opportunity or a challenge of an infrastructure issue. That's what we're all asking for. And you have that information, and it's not costly or timely to do. But what you've got to show is that it's nationally significant, that what you're putting forward to get to the attention of the federal government, that this proposal is nationally significant. And that information's in our assessment framework. Everything I talk about is on our website. And local governments do this regularly. Southeast Melbourne got a proposal up. The local governments of Southeast Melbourne got a proposal up earlier, and they were able to show that there was a transport program that required consideration and that was nationally significant. And so they put a proposal together. We independently assess it and we put it on the priority list. And I'll give you another example. We also, using the plan, so as we've been talking about the plan, we as IA go, we believe that there's areas that warrant being put on the priority list that we believe the federal government should show. And we may not have been given a proposal. So they're called IA, being Infrastructure Australia, identified initiatives. This year we put on one for remote Indigenous communities in Northern Australia to convert their diesel energy requirements in their remote communities to renewable. And you can imagine why. There was health, economic, and a whole lot of benefits from pivoting from diesel to renewable energy source in those remote communities. We felt that was crucially important, and that come through our work, such as the plan. The Northern Territory government had a budget soon after and went, oh, we saw this on the Infrastructure Australia's priority list. We're going to partly fund that. The federal government in their budget said, oh, this has been on the Infrastructure Australia's priority list. And we're also going to give some funding towards that proposal as well. So I'm trying to make it come alive for you. I'll give you another example. When we think about our First Nations people, it's not one. We all know that. We all live within different nations and countries and cultures in Australia, hundreds of them. So we identified that in Australia, we needed a unique program of cultural centres around Australia to reflect and recognise our diverse and unique First Nations people around Australia. So we put that on the priority list. We feel that's crucially important, that there are these cultural centres scattered all over Australia. One's in, for instance, we talk about there's Alice Springs, Perth. I know Adelaide is looking at one, but they all should be joined up so that there's ways that communities in regional Australia can use those cultural centres and can learn from them. So there's a great opportunity of economic or social infrastructure proposal. And what we suggest is this: if you're unsure, that's what we're here for. Townsville last year had 5 proposals they thought would warrant being on the priority list. They sent us literally 2 paragraphs on each. We spent an hour with the Townsville, the CEO and some of the council staff, and we worked through those. And we said, look, we think 4 really warrant being on the priority list. And so then they worked on that and they put it on. And the other thing is, whilst the main list is launched in February to align with budget, we make sure it's live, so it's updated. So you can send anything in any time and the board will look at it every 2 months. Because what we've learned through COVID, as we know that there was a lot of these state and federal government announcements linked to infrastructure. And we really learned that it was crucially important that our priority list was the latest. Yeah. It had the latest on there. And because literally Treasury will ring us and say, we want the latest list. So whilst what you see on the website is we literally have a live list, and they may even say to us, what do you know is coming? So if you as local government areas have come to us and given us an idea, a nugget of an idea, that will go, we start tracking that. And the reason we're doing that is so if the federal government ring us and say, we want to know anything about aquatic centres, playgrounds, transport hubs, whatever, we'll go, well, here's the latest list and this is what we're tracking. That is literally how we work to make sure that we have the latest information. That's really good advice, Romilly, and I'm sure a lot of light bulbs are going off around local governments listening to that conversation. We're going to wrap this up. We're very, very grateful for the time that you've given us. Kathryn, any last questions or comments before we let Romilly go?
Look, no, not really. I think you've provided an excellent overview of the report, which we will share with the recording that we send out from today. But really keen, Romilly, to explore the idea of having Infrastructure Australia back to lead a live panel discussion with your respective infrastructure bodies throughout the state. So I think that will be really valuable for the sector.
Thank you. We welcome that. And just a really quick hint, don't let the pages scare you. Use the executive summary, use the reform priority list, because it's really like a little executive summary, and go straight into the implementation pathway and look under local government. We've done it to make it really easy for you. So don't look at the whole document and go, oh, look at those areas of the document that is of interest to you in your local government area, whether that's water, waste, resilience, sustainability. There is something in it, and we've tried to make it really user-friendly to be able to find those areas that are of interest to you and your communities.
Romilly Madew, Chief Executive, Infrastructure Australia, thank you very much for joining us in conversation today on VLGA Connect.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.